the British used the courtyard here as the graveyard. They did bury a lot of others here, but they didn't keep records of all those that were buried here. So later they did not recognize those that were buried here, with the exception of the 4 graves here. All the 3 graves over there belong to the British. This is the only African grave that they would recognize in this courtyard. And this grave belonged to the late Reverend Philip. He was the first Ghanaian that was trained as Anglican priest in the coastal area. As I told you, the first European to trade with the people were the Portuguese. They actually came here to trade with 3 main purposes. One was to trade with the people, to spread missionary activities, and also to find a new short route to India where they were already trading with the people. So all the other Europeans that followed the Portuguese here did the same thing. They traded with the people and they spread missionary activities. And as I said, this castle was built by the British, and Britain's denomination is Anglican. So the first Anglican church to be built in Ghana is what can be found up the Mill Dungeon. That is a small room up there. That was the first Anglican church. And this grave here belonged to the first Ghanaian who was trained as Anglican priest in the coastal area. He was trained as a clergyman in Britain, and they served as a clergyman and a schoolmaster to the Negroes here. He did die here in 1816 at the age of 75, but because of his contribution to education in the coastal area, we still have some missionary schools named after him, Philip School. So Philip, the Reverend Philip. So this grave belonged to the late Reverend Philip in the coastal area. This is the only African grave that is recognized in this coastal area. It belonged to one of the British soldiers. His name was Seaton Fighter. He was stationed at this castle as a black, but he died here in 1812 at the age of 28, a British soldier called Seaton Fighter. And the grave here, the wooden grave, belongs to the wife of Governor McLean. Her name was Letitia Elizabeth Landon. She was a Chelsea poet and a novelist who got married to Governor McLean, but she died barely 2 months after her arrival to the coast at the age of 36. And that is the last grave belonging to Governor McLean. Governor John McLean was a Scottish who became the president of British Merchants Association and nominated a governor to the coastal area. He reigned here from 1830 to 1843 and died here in 1847 as a judicial assessor. McLean did a lot for the people as compared to the other British governors. A very important peace treaty between the Ashantis and the Fantis, that is the peace treaty of 1830, was designed and signed on behalf of the British by Governor McLean. He also introduced the judiciary system in Ghana, that is the legal system. He died here in 1847 as a judicial assessor. Because of his contribution to peace and so on in the coastal area, he was known to want peace and order. So his grave was greatly preserved. That is the last grave. Governor McLean, his wife, a British soldier, and the late Reverend Philip. These were the only 4 graves they could in this courtyard to preserve. All the others they could not recognize, so they ignored them. That's it. This entrance here was known as one of the peepholes in the Mill Dungeon I talked to you about. As I said, they served as a supervision host to the dungeons for the merchant to stand and supervise the conditions in the dungeons. And this was the underground tunnel from the Mill Dungeon to the female center. As I told you, in the Mill Dungeon, when the slave trade was going on in Cape Coast Castle, the shrine that we met there was not existing there, and the original entrance to this tunnel was also not sealed. So the male captives were driven through this underground tunnel from the Mill Dungeon, and they walk through it a little distance. They meet their female counterpart down there. Then they walk through the door of no return. That is the last exit for the captives. They drive them through, take them by a smaller boat at the shores of the beach before the big slave ships on the sea for their voyages. Both entrance of this tunnel have been sealed, so you can just also stand at the people and peek through. here was the exit for the tunnel, for the captives in the tunnel. Here was sealed is part of the sealed places done by Sir Charles McCarthy to stop the slave trade in this castle. But as I said, it only stopped it in this castle. It still went on outside the castle between the merchants, so it was totally abolished there in the mid-1860s. And this sealed area was the original exit for the captives through Cape Coast Castle. Here was sealed because as time went on, the British realized that the sea was coming in the castle through here. And also other enemy European spies and pirates were able to sneak in the castle against the British. So they sealed here on security ground for themselves and opened another main exit down there for the captives. These two dungeons facing each other here served as the female slave dungeon, and each dungeon did contain 150 to 250 female captives at a time in this castle. So in all, Cape Coast Castle female dungeon was able to contain 300 to 500 female captives. The children among the captives were kept to the female slaves over here. The female captives also did face their side of the atrocities in the dungeons. They didn't get a sewage gutter in the dungeons, so they were given buckets in here as their sewage system, for their sewage system. The female, a lot died here out of stress because they were left here to attend all the nature's call in the dungeons here. As we all know, females, some will be passing through their menstrual cycle and so on, and they did that everything here without taking bath and so on. A lot of them died in these dungeons out of stress. Many of them were also raped by some of the British soldiers and the governors. Some of the women actually got pregnant here before the arrival of their ships, and they were set free here. Because of two major reasons the European merchants harbored in them. One was that they have, if they carried the pregnant women from here to their final destinations, they wouldn't be able to work harder for them to achieve what they were sent there for. So they set them free. And also they have it that the money they would use to bring up an offspring of the female slave, they could use that same money to buy a full grown-up slave here for life. That was another reason why they set the female captives pregnant free in the coastal area. But that brought a new problem to the people in the locality. That is the problem of disunity. Those children that were brought forth by the female slaves, a lot of them were brought up by the missionaries. They were given formal education and European names. So they also started to look down upon the people who had no form of education or whatsoever at all in the locality. So that started the problem of disunity among the Africans here. And many of the men being kept out of daily life for a very long time in their dungeons, those that got here seeing the fresh daylight, some could not stand it and also got blind, and they were also set free here because they needed able industrial workers, not blind men and pregnant women. And those that they could not detect it here, if they were able to detect it on their way through the voyages, they just add them to those who die in the ships and throw them into the sea alive. This is the door of no return that I was talking to you about, the last exit for the captives and the gateway to the Americas for the captives. The captives were driven through this door of no return and taken by a smaller boat at the shores of the beach before the big transatlantic ships which were waiting on the sea for their voyages. The men were tied together on the smaller boat at the shores of the beach, 4 to 6 men at the time on the smaller boat. And because most of them were very much desperate to escape, a lot of million different figures, but they still estimate it around 20 million, the number exported out of the whole of West Africa to Europe and Americas. And out of this appalling number, they don't account for all those that died during the slave raiding activities, those that died in these dungeons which housed them and killed many. They don't account for all of them. They were just pardoned, thrown into the sea, not counting the number that died in the slave ships. Because they were their source of income, power in Europe and Americas, the captives were actually packed in the ships like lanterns. Many of them did not survive the deadly transatlantic voyages, and because of the number that died through the voyages, the slave ships was regarded by some historians as floated prophets. At this point, if anybody have a question so far, you can ask.
I don't know if this is a door of return or it's still a door of return.
Going out is a door of return, and coming in with written door, going out is the door of no return, coming in with written door of return. That was done during the first emancipation celebration held in Ghana. That was last year. They brought two couples, one from America to back to their roots. And just to signify back to their roots, they brought them on the road from Accra to Cromartin, where they take them by a boat on the sea to Cape Coast Council shows. Then the people carried them through the door of no return to the courtyard for the ceremony, just to signify back to their roots. It was done during the first emancipation held in Ghana.
When I'm not working, when I'm not playing, when I'm not shopping, I watch Caribbean Predator.
You're just joining us, you're watching Caribbean Ride Tour with Frederica Rule as our tour guide.
All the rooms from down here to up there, this served to them as the storehouses or warehouse in Cape Coast Castle. These was where the British imported goods were kept. They imported in finished goods like sugar, blood, alcoholic beverages, gunpowder, and so on. They kept them in here in exchange of the mineral resources of Africa. Then they export the mineral resources to Europe. But gradually, when they realized that the mineral resources was diminishing, they totally replaced it with the slave trade, where they imported in the European finished goods in exchange of the slaves. Then they export the slaves from here to the Americas, Caribbean, certain parts of Europe like Liverpool and so on. They go and work for them in the plantations, cotton farms, tobacco farms, mining areas and industries. The same European merchants export that finished product from the Americas back to Europe to produce the total finished product. So that created the triangular trading activities. Trade from Europe to Africa, Africa to the Americas, and Americas back to Europe. So this was the trade, triangular trade between the Europeans and the Africans. This is the dungeons and the storehouses in the Cape Coast Castle, where the British kept the European. In building this castle, the British actually did importing most of their own materials from Europe to build the castle. They imported even their own architecture knowledge, their artisans to build the castle, with the exception of the sun, water, and the human labor that was used in building Cape Coast Castle. They did imported in the materials like bricks, cement, wooden doors, stones, and so on, all from Europe. This door here is one of the original doors imported by the British to build this castle. They did imported in all their major materials, but presently, all the doors and windows in Cape Coast Castle have been changed to our own locally made doors called the Odun wood. This is the only one which is left imported by the British to build the castle. The only one which is being preserved, and this is the only door which is more than 300 years in Cape Coast Castle.
The labor that they had to build, to do the renovations of this building, for instance, do the renovations of this building, were they some of the same slaves that they had in captivity?
Actually, those slaves that they had in captivity, they intended to export them to their final destinations to trade for their trading purpose and also to benefit for them. But the labor that was used in building this castle were the people that were apart from the localities in the coastal area. The captives, they did not use them in renovating and building Cape Coast Castle. They had laborers from the locality where they paid some of them in terms of goods and so on. And this place said that their cell. But before I do talk about this cell of the castle, I would like all of us to go in there to see the conditions when we talk about the castle in Cape Coast Castle. So the cell. And this is the only cell of Cape Coast Castle. It is served as a cell for 5 groups of people. The first group were the British deserted soldiers. Some of the British soldiers that were brought down here to defend the merchants were very notorious. Some of them misbehaved at arriving here. Some went as far as to the localities. They go there to booze, misbehave, and so on. So if the British officers got them here, they brought them here for punishment. But due to the conditions in this cell, they were brought here for some few hours as punishment and set free because they still needed them to defend them. And this same cell, this served as a cell for other enemy European spies. As I told you, due to the competition, there were a lot of attacks among the Europeans themselves. Everybody wanted to capture a very good trading post. So if any other European spy comes to spy on the British here and they don't succeed, they brought them here for punishment. And this same cell, this served as a cell for pirates. Those pirates that came to the coast here to trade with the people, if they also go to sea, and the British soldiers here they brought them here for punishment. And the third group was the stolen captives. Some of the Africans that were captured as captives were very warriors. Many of them fought fiercely for their rights. And those people, if they captured them again and they realized they can't do anything to control them, they also brought them here for punishment. The last group were the criminals. The trade was between the Europeans and the Africans, though there were a lot of cheating among themselves. If any European or British merchant reports anybody for cheating in their business transactions, that person is recognized to be criminal, arrested and brought here for punishment. And apart from the British deserted soldiers, these were the conditions for the others. There were some thick doors here, door removed. They closed these two doors, one outside here to make sure no air will come here for survival. So no air, no food, no water. And this small cell did contain as many as 50 people at a time. They waited for all to die before they were given burial. They threw most of them into the sea, and others were given mass graves outside the castle. The actual number of people that died through the cell of the castle were also not counted. There is no record of them. And due to the conditions here, this cell was known to the people here as the condemned cell of Cape Coast Castle. Some people still call it condemned cell of Cape Coast Castle. A lot of them died making scratches and so on for their life, but did not succeed in this dungeon. All those that were brought here none survived, with the exception of the deserted soldiers.
Stay tuned for much more on Caribbean Body Talk. Ms. Frederica Rule, BBC Television Network, would like to thank you very much for this most historic tour. Thank you very much. You have been watching Caribbean Body Talk, where the vision gets clearer every time. I'm Rita Akins-Harley, your host, and I'll see you next time.
When I'm not working, when I'm not playing, when I'm not shopping, I watch Korean.